Call the regular meeting of council to order at 3 p.m. Everybody mute your mics unless you're speaking. I hear a couple of things going. Adoption of the agenda. I would just like to add one piece being just a short thing, item number 9.6, just as an update on the latest bit that I've been involved with the coal discussions. And Kara, future regular council meetings, if we can just have a little coal update, just as a standing thing on number 9, or on that. No, it's not always number 9, but you know what I mean. So I'll ask for a motion from Councillor Cooey that council adopt the agenda for the regular meeting of council February 22nd as amended.
I will give you that motion, Mayor Snodgrass.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Consent agenda. Regular council meeting minutes from February 8th. Strat priority chart. Ask for a motion from Councillor Kinghorn that the following items be adopted by omnibus motion in accordance with the council's procedure bylaw. Meeting minutes February 8th and the strategic priorities chart.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. I will give you that motion.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Public comments, Kara? None?
There are none.
Thank you. Delegation, so Lauren is here from West Winds. Let her in. Give her another little bit here, Kara, but if she can't get connected, do we have Jim and Duncan? Are they ready as well? Because maybe we could just jump to Jim and Duncan and take care of that while Lauren gets better connection. Looks like she's on her phone, so.
Something's happening. Did you turn the video on?
Gentlemen.
Greg, your worship.
How you doing?
We're good.
So Kara, we'll get Lauren back arranged so that right after these guys are done, we can get Lauren back in. Thank you. Okay, let her rip, guys.
You read our overview, I'm sure. I guess the summary is that we recognize the Beechwood and Wallaceville land as really an exceptional asset for High River. And some people know about it already. It's getting used. If you're back there, you see paths and evidence of people going for walks all over the place. But we think that probably a lot of High Riverites don't know about it. And we think for everybody, whether you know about it now or not, it can be made into a safer, nicer place that will be a real quality of life enhancement and take advantage of that asset that we have. I think we see it as a little bit of a mini Fish Creek Park kind of a feeling, a natural area that can be used for walking, biking, hiking, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, bird watching, whatever you like. And just a healthy asset and taking advantage of land that's just sitting there.
So we pitched this to the Rotary Club, and the Rotary Club is behind it in principle. Subject to us talking to the town, council giving their blessing in principle, which we would hope would then let us deal with administration. And with administration, we would sort out the scope, the rules, and all the other things we don't know about, that would allow us then to come back with that kind of detail, which would also give us some idea of costs for sort of the next level of approval from Rotary. So far, we've received lots of positive feedback. We have offers of help from the community at large. And, we've just discovered a couple of things since then. One of them is certainly in the beach property, there's precedent going back years because they actually took a bush mower and mowed paths through there for 5 or 6 years because they knew people were using it anyway. And if they did that, then it just made it a little safer, it directed the traffic, and it worked out for those guys. So, we've had a few people talk like that. We also understand that the town is just looking at the new green space plan, which is great. So this is also a really good time to figure out how this would dovetail, complement that, and make sure that everything works together.
From a physical perspective, we see a network of paths over time that would tie into the Happy Trail network that would be look like they might have been there for years, be minimally intrusive into the environment, into the natural area, be wood chip covered, which is cheaper, but it's also nicer to walk on and it gives a more natural feel. And we see this as a project that's very scalable. It doesn't all have to be done at once. We might identify the best or simplest or highest priority areas to put some pathway in and see how things go, and then potentially expand it from there.
And we understand that the town only controls today a small portion of this. However, we know that you're dealing with the province on this. I expect there's no reason to believe those talks won't be successful. So for the time being, at the conceptual level, we're just assuming that, at some point in time, the town will be able to work with us on this.
So we're hoping you'll give us the thumbs up, ask your staff to work with us to move this forward and develop a more detailed plan.
And that's sort of the end of the presentation. We're happy to answer questions.
Perfect. Thank you. Bruce.
Hi, guys. Thank you for the presentation. And I'm disappointed to say that I did not read your, because I couldn't get it to open in my agenda, but I'm sure it was operator error on my part. But I did have a chance to talk to Duncan at some length about this just a week or two ago. So it's a very interesting sounding proposal. Just like you talked about Happy Trails and kind of a mulch based trail in the same sentence. And so you're obviously not talking about something paved like Happy Trails, but just established trails. And I'll just finish my comment, then I'll let you respond. But you're probably aware both those areas, especially Beechwood, Mercer, have many trails already in place, and people walk all over the place, and that's one of the appeals to it. Is that you don't have to stay on one of the many main trails. So I guess I would just like to know a little bit more about are you talking about established trails through both those areas and kind of how you see that working, and would you rather not see people off on other trails?
I think we see potential for any of those things, Bruce, and I think it's a matter of prioritizing things. With respect to the mulch and versus the paved Happy Trails we have right now, if you walked on a mulch trail, it's way easier on you and it looks more natural and it's cheaper. So yeah, that seems like the way to go. And I think we're not at the stage where we've got any idea really precisely where trails should start or where they should go. I think over time, if everyone likes the look of how this is shaping up, there could be a network of trails, and they should be easy to follow. And but for now, I think we have to get into this to determine where to start, what the right place to start is, and what the priorities might be.
And my only comment would be, it would seem that where there's already established trails, they're probably there for a reason, because it makes sense in people's minds to walk that way. I still think that there's no reason to hold people to a mulch trail. However, we have heard from a couple people who've been, and primarily in the Mercer lands, where, you know, people have said, I go back there all the time, and once or twice a year, I get lost. And it takes me, you know, half an hour to figure out where I am, and then I can get out. So if you're at all nervous of that, if you find or stick to a mulch trail, keep following it, and you know you're going to get out.
And particularly at night, if you're there at dusk, and it's pretty easy to get disoriented. Plus, you know, trails would make it easy to identify where to get in there and lead you out, as Duncan said.
Okay, yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, and I love the initiative that you guys are having in bringing that to us, and the fact that Rotary is willing to look at getting behind it as well is really good. I think it's you know, you noted that the green space and parks master plan, it was just presented to us. A draft a few weeks ago, and so obviously it had a lot of things for us to digest. So our challenge is going to be to try to incorporate everything and just make sure that you know that we have a plan and kind of stick to that plan, and so but yeah, no, I really appreciate you guys doing this. So thanks.
No further questions. I like it. Chris, can you hook up with Duncan and Jim and just kind of direct from there? Sorry, I'll let Chris and then we'll go to Michael.
Yeah, I think that's just a quick motion to direct staff from council would be great, to direct us to contact Jim and Duncan and get this project discussed about further.
Okay, go ahead, Michael.
That's where I was going. I wanted to put a motion forward where appropriate that council direct administration to work with this subset of Rotary, if I can call it that. And thanks, guys, for your presentation. For council to direct administration to work with them on the high level ideas behind this proposal, and see if we can take it for the benefit of the community.
Okay, perfect. There's the motion. Any other questions? All in favor? Carried. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.
We got Lauren back, Kara.
I actually wasn't able to get a hold of her, but I'm just going to see if we can get her in. There she is.
There she is. You can hear us, Lauren? Maybe. We can't hear you.
Mayor Snodgrass, I'm just
Yep.
texting her to let her know that we can't hear her.
Can you hear me now?
We
Yeah.
got you now, Lauren. Yeah,
Oh, my sincere apologies.
that's fine. It's Zoom.
Yeah. Usually it's not Zoom on my phone though.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lauren.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Snodgrass, members of council. My name is Lorraine Ingalls. I'm the CAO for West Winds Communities. West Winds Communities' vision is safe, affordable homes and sustainable communities. We recognize that we cannot provide affordable housing alone and are seeking to develop community affordable housing needs analysis in High River for a 10-year timeline horizon. We feel this study will better identify community needs that otherwise would not come from West Winds or our local FCSS department. The study will be conducted in an efficient and effective manner to be completed by the end of this calendar year. West Winds, in partnership with Habitat for Humanity, have identified alignment with the Town of High River's strategic plan on two elements with the proposed needs assessment. First, it helps develop vibrant communities by the town strategically investing in community amenities, facilities, services, and events. And secondly, it supports responsible development, establishing growth directions and partnership. At its most basic level, affordable housing is about people. Access to affordable housing helps create inclusive communities and improves the overall health, prosperity, and safety of our High River community. Tenants in affordable housing have greater chances to find and keep jobs, to learn and develop skills, and to be active participants in their communities. Affordable housing also helps boost local economies by increasing the purchasing power of its residents and by attracting employers with the promise of a stable workforce. West Winds, in partnership with Habitat for Humanity, is requesting up to $14,000 for the study. We hope to have your kind consideration, and I'd be open to any questions.
Thanks, Lauren. Carol, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass, and thank you very much, Lorraine, for your presentation. I'm very much in support of this initiative because thinking back when I was working at McBride, and I was helping a lot of clients that were actually living in their cars. And it's very hard to find employment when you don't have safe, affordable housing to live in. So it's kind of that catch-22. As well as statistically speaking, affordable housing is so important for the entire realm of all ages. And we did see a lot of people who were over 40 who were homeless, as well as the senior population. So to me, this is a very important initiative. And I would like to put a motion on the table for consideration is that Council directs administration to review West Winds Communities and Habitat for Humanity's request for the up to $14,000 contribution for the Regional Affordable Housing Strategy and Study, and return to our March 8th meeting with some financial options to see if that's available.
Perfect. So a motion on the floor, discussion, any questions? Councillor Masterman.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. Lauren, thanks for the presentation, and Councillor McMillan for the motion. And it probably says it here, but I just can't see it right now. I think you indicated that funding had been sought from 3 other municipalities, with Black Diamond, Green, and Longview declining. Who was the third? Was it Turner Valley?
Correct, and they have verbally declined at this point because they're in search of a new CAO and juggling other priorities.
Oh, okay. Okay, so just for the heck of it, what if we said no? Like, where would that leave you?
So we're still going to be proceeding with the study, but it's going to be extremely narrow. So we won't be looking at any affordable housing for sale at all. So Habitat for Humanity wouldn't be participating if there's no contribution. And we're strictly going to be looking for West Winds typical mandates. So we're looking for more high density accommodation and very modest accommodation. So nothing that lets you look at rental into sale or allows people to build any sort of equity. It's going to be strictly rental and very basic accommodation.
Okay.
Again, all High River residents.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. I don't read anything into my question. I just play the devil's advocate here. And so I really appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Yeah. The other thing too is we wouldn't make it available for public circulation. So potential developers that are looking at developing or anything like that, it wouldn't be available for other not-for-profits as well.
Councillor Cooey.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass, and thanks very much, Lauren. It's great to see you. My question is a bit opposite to Bruce. So if we say yes to the 14,000, because it certainly is nowhere near the 40 to 50, what does that information look like that will come out of that?
So we would be working with representatives from the town of High River to see exactly what your needs are as a council and a community in that affordable housing needs assessment. You might be looking at special interest groups and targets. For example, typically in High River, we know that single men between the ages of 40 to 64 are typically a group where there's considerable gap. We'd be doing a lot more research to see what would be the most appropriate way to provide that housing that is economical, as opposed to just looking at how many bedrooms do we need of a certain configuration. So we'd be more focused.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lauren.
So no further questions. So Councillor McMillan has a motion on the floor, which basically council directed Min to review West Wind's request and return to March 8th meeting with options. Does that pretty much tell the tale, Carol? So no further questions. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thanks very much, Lauren.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. CMRB. Thanks very much, Lauren.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Perfect. So I'll just,
Wow.
sorry.
We got like everybody. We got all the big hitters. Greg, Charlie, Jordan, Jamie. Wow, I'm in a meeting. This is great. I thought it was just going to be one person.
Good afternoon, Your Worship. Council.
How are you, Jamie?
Everything for High River, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Appreciate it, Charlie. Do you guys want to throw your cameras on? All I got are names, if you don't mind.
Oh, yes, there we go.
And who's going to speak to this? Is Jordan speaking, or Charlie, or Steve?
I believe Jordan's going to kick us off, Mr. Mayor.
Right on. Thank you.
Yeah, Your Worship, I'll kick us off and then I'll hand it over to Charlie if that's okay with you.
Yep, you bet.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, members of council. We're happy to be here to present to you. We're going to present on the version of the growth plan as it currently stands, recognizing that there is still some work to be done. I'm just going to walk us through maybe the original timeline and a little bit of background on the growth and servicing plans, and then turn it over to Charlie and the rest of the team from HDR to walk us through it. So as you may be aware, the CMRB came into existence January 1st of 2018. It was mandated to deliver the growth and servicing plans no later than December 31st of 2020. However, as the pandemic set in, it became evident that meeting that original deadline would be a bit challenging. And as we saw the province starting to extend deadlines on a number of other requirements for municipalities to submit to the government, and looking at the workload that was happening and the need to work remotely as we're doing right now, we decided to request an extension from the province for 4 months in June of 2020. In October of 2020, we heard back from the province and they had granted us a 2-month extension. So with that extension, we sat down with the consultants and with the board, kind of sharpened the timeline and set to work. It was a pretty torrid pace, as your administration can attest to, and the members of council who are participating on the CMRB. And as we worked through it into January, it kind of became evident that meeting that timeline would not give us the best plan for the region. So on January 29th, the board passed a motion asking for an extension to June the 1st. Administration has submitted a letter, and it is our understanding that the minister is very open to entertaining that extension. And we're hoping to hear back from the minister's office this week. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Charlie to start the presentation on the plan.
Thank you, Jordan, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to provide you with this briefing, and we hope have some discussion as your time and agenda permit this afternoon. I will put my presentation up on the screen, I hope. And go to full screen. I hope. And there we are. Is that coming through all right? And is my audio okay, Your Worship? Okay, then we're ready to proceed. We're planning to go through this presentation and stop partway through for discussion on a core part of the work, and then perhaps some more at the end. Again, this afternoon you have me and Steve Power and Jonathan Schmidt here, along with my colleague Peter Calthorpe, who's been leading this work. Peter and I sometimes shudder to admit it, but we've been working together on regional planning for nearly 30 years. When I was initially a city council member in my hometown of Portland, and he was hired to be the consultant to prepare the growth management plan for the Portland metropolitan area. So between the four of us and the others working on this project, we've had a lot of experience with regional planning, but yours is different because the Calgary region is unique. We have, of course, had some time together physically in the room, and you, Mayor Snodgrass, and other members of your council have put a lot of time into this, and Mr. Mohammed and Ms. Peck have been relentlessly participative in being engaged in this process, but we've all missed being around a table together, because doing things like creative work of planning, much less political negotiation, are a lot easier in person than they are virtually. But we've all tried to make this constrained environment work, and to nevertheless work together towards a good draft plan. But we sure look forward to being back in the same room together, we hope, maybe even by the end of this process. As I said, we're going to walk you through some key areas of policy that the plan has now arrived at draft policy for the board to deliberate upon. We'll spend the bulk of our time in our presentation on growth management and the efficient use of land, because that's really the heart of the matter. Where are you going to build and not, and what? And then the other elements are, if you will, supportive policies that make sure that the land use scheme actually functions in the way that you as regional leaders want it to. We've been through several phases of this process. First, a great deal of information gathering from the municipalities, from various data sets that were already available or were created by CMRB and administration for us to be able to build the data behind some scenarios. And I'll talk about those scenarios in a little more detail, but we used scenario planning. What if we grew like this versus like that, as a way to test what different policies might yield for how the region handles the next million people, because that's what this plan is about, is how does the Calgary metropolitan region accommodate the next million people? Not a fictional thing. And again, that I worked on my hometown regional plan 25 years ago, and we've added about 1 million people since then. So these things happen. We're now down at the third phase of this process of developing and debating real policy that will govern local municipal actions and the opportunities and constraints facing development. Why do this? What do you get out of it? What are the benefits? Well, one, to be globally competitive at a time when capital and talent are mobile, and when we're all trying to figure out how livable cities repair themselves after the social and economic disruption of isolation and pandemic. Being a globally competitive region is a really good idea. You have been one. You want to continue to be one. A lot of that, of course, always has to do with attracting talent, educated, professional, and other workers who want to live in your area versus their other choices. You want to be efficient and save taxpayer dollars. You want to build better communities. There's some, if less tangible, nevertheless very important things about loving where you live and living in a place that you feel at home in, and that also is sustainable and healthy as a place to live in. And then again, try to avoid wasting resources, energy, the world's energy, and your own local energy. So efficiency, livability, competition, all good reasons to work together and devise a plan for a better future. We started with some growth principles that were already enshrined in the interim growth plan that the board had adopted and that the administration had been working from in terms of evaluating ASPs and other statutory plans in the meantime. And these goals of integration and efficiency, of protecting water, a critical ingredient of life and growth in your region. And again, focusing on efficiency and sustainability. As I said, we had a great deal of data to draw upon. This, for example, is a map that shows at least most of the very many area structure plans that had already been approved in the past and were in effect, some built out, some much less so, across the region. We gathered quite a bit of public input, again, not necessarily in the way that we would have hoped through being on the street and in other in-person gatherings, but despite having to pivot to an online engagement of people, we were able to engage quite a few people. And we heard some pretty strong themes from the public, which no doubt you've heard a lot when you talk about growth management, which is try to decrease sprawl and create more density and housing choices. For all the different sizes and shapes of households. More transit, please, that is well planned and affordable. Think about the environment. Think about the world's environment and our own local environment. Collaborate, please, a Canadian and Albertan value, which people expect to see expressed in how people govern together. And then give developers certainty so that they know what they can get permitted and built and what they can't. And developers, as we all know, appreciate that kind of certainty. So the public was pretty clear about these kinds of goals. There's some general planning principles that we hoped to see expressed in this plan of connectivity. If you give people choices and a good network about how they move around, they don't all drive their cars everywhere for every trip by themselves. Diversity and balance matter, again, because housings should be diverse and should be balanced because there are lots of different ways that people want to live and lots of different sizes and shapes of households. Human scale, something that in North American development, and unfortunately even in other countries that for, at least for a while, like China, imitated North American development, we got away from human scale and we built giant arterials that are fearful to cross on foot and made it very difficult to walk and to pay much attention to life at street level unless one was going 60 kilometers an hour down a street. Human scale matters. Turns out it's an enduring value. And so is conservation and restoration. Let's use what we have well. Let's restore what we've damaged. So these are general planning themes that we believe in as matters of professional philosophy, but also, again, we've heard that the public cares about too. One of the things that we work with in the Calgary region is an already strong tradition of city-centered growth. You have very strong existing communities, and you and High River have demonstrated this especially well with a strong downtown, a form-based code, a lot of progressive planning policies that you've already put in place to try to reinforce the character of the town that you already have. And we were heartened in the early learning stage of this plan for Peter and me as people from out of town to see a lot of the good work that's been done, whether it's in city centers or in infill or in master planned communities. There were some areas that were obvious at the outset of this process where there was already a lot of growth pressure and a lot of activity in terms of proposed ASPs. And so we focused on those areas as potential areas for focused growth. And then, as I said, we built scenarios. We took all that data And we built scenarios about how the region might grow to accommodate that next million people. And then from those scenarios, our software that Peter's firm has developed allows us to then derive all kinds of metrics for what would this actually mean in terms of how many more miles of highway we might have to build, or how much carbon, how big our carbon footprint would be. And those data provide a rationale for making some of these changes. We used in the scenario building process something that we've called place types. And that is not a zoning designation, not single family 1 or multifamily 2, but a basket of typical building types that characterize a town center, or a medium density transit oriented environment, or a residential single family environment. So we used those place types to build this plan. And we didn't make those up out of our own heads. We looked around at the typical forms of development that are prevalent in the Calgary region. There are a lot of rural residential areas in the region. We used that as a place type. It's a low density, almost exclusively single family environment, very auto dependent. There are some typical subdivisions, again, something that both US and Canada and other parts of the world have built a lot of in the last 50 years, building less of them now because these turn out to be less popular than a mixed use master planned community environment is for most households. And again, something that the Calgary region is quite good at, master planned communities with a variety of housing types and a mixture of densities, destinations that you can walk to, local commercial, schools, parks, the ingredients of a more complete community. An amped up version of that, the town center, it's like your downtown or significant parts of Calgary, where walkable trips are easy and uses are mixed, often in the same building, and where transit works particularly well because of both the density and the richness of this transportation grid on which that transit runs. And then, of course, some standard, other standard types like industrial. You have a big employment base in the Calgary region, you're going to need more. So there needs to be industrial land, and there needs to be office, although the standalone office park may be much less of a thing of the future than it has been in the past. Still going to need office, preferably in those mixed use environments. So those are the place types that we used to build these scenarios. And we really tested 3. One that we called business as usual, which was really just an extrapolation. You see all those ASPs scattered out there across the landscape. An extrapolation of the building pattern that has been going on. Again, some good city-centered growth, but some sprawl. And if you add another 1 million people in that format, you're going to have more sprawl. So we said, let's look at a couple of other scenarios. One, really focusing on those existing urban centers and making that development pattern quite compact. And then a third that posits the use of transit. Let's be very aggressive about transit corridors extending out beyond Calgary by commuter rail, for example, out to Chestermere, out to Cochrane, light rail or bus rapid transit going east and north and south to you. Let's make transit-oriented development the norm. And from those scenarios, and in those scenarios, we assumed that each municipality would be accommodating the proportion of growth that had already been understood and accepted by the board. Well, when you test those scenarios, you find out that compared to the business as usual pattern, either one of the 2 that we tested and one that we ultimately derived that we called a synthesis of the 2, that's more compact and has more transit than business as usual, though maybe not going quite as far down the transit road as the TOD scenario did. There was very little difference between the alternative scenarios but a lot of difference between the alternatives and business as usual. That is, big reductions in carbon emissions, both from buildings and from vehicle kilometers traveled. Big reductions in land consumption, in the cost of new infrastructure. Big reductions in the use of water, 15%, maybe doesn't sound that big, but of course, when water is scarce, 15% is enough to make a difference. So qualitatively and quantitatively, some real benefits to going to this more compact, organized approach to the pattern of growth as opposed to business as usual. We also compared those, what we call preferred place types of mixed use and master plan communities to the typical subdivision, and found, as you see in this chart, big improvements in the performance in development cost and land consumption, in water consumption and carbon, if you compare the mixed use scenario versus the subdivision, or the master plan scenario versus the subdivision. These place types have great value, not only for quality of life, but also for the actual cost of servicing over time. So we took that scenario planning work and then translated that into a set of draft policies for growth management and the efficient use of land that attempt to guide the region towards that scenario by how municipalities plan going forward. We also tried to address some key problems in the region, like conflict between municipalities about growth, which of course has happened from time to time. Tried to build on the tradition of cooperation that you already have. You do a lot of intermunicipal planning and some intermunicipal servicing already in the region. That's a tradition there. And different from many other growth management plans, really relied on this idea of calling out the benefits of these preferred place types and calling upon the municipalities to plan for those, rather than the more punitive, or even, I would have to say, crude approach of drawing an urban growth boundary and saying, grow inside, don't grow outside, figure out the rest. This approach is more flexible for the municipalities because it sets goals for how much of these preferred place types you should try to accommodate in your growth, but doesn't tell you where. We leave that to you to figure out where within High River and the other municipalities involved that each type of growth should be accommodated. So again, here are the policy tools that I'm describing. One, focus on these preferred place types of infill, which of course you're doing, infill and redevelopment, such as you're doing in downtown High River now. Use more mixed use and transit-oriented forms of development. Rely a lot on master plan community for more suburban growth rather than the traditional subdivision. And then a couple of innovations here. One, there are some areas, and you're involved in one of them, where the future of that area can best be planned and its plan assured for success if municipalities work together. And it happens that in each case of these three recommended joint planning areas, there are three municipalities involved. Airdrie, Rocky View County, and Calgary in the north, Chestermere, Rocky View County, and Calgary in the east, and Okotoks and Foothills County in the south. In each case, what we're recommending is that those three municipalities work together to plan for this area because it's going to be accommodating a significant amount of the growth of the region. We still want to make sure there's rural growth, that there's appropriate rural growth. A lot of that, as you'll see, is really focused on hamlets rather than spreading it out with random subdivisions all over the landscape. And then there's some important backstops against all this change. One is that area structure plans that have already been approved are still in effect and still can be built out, and no one is in a position to change that. And so that's a given. Existing ASPs can be built out. If people want to change those ASPs, as we'll talk about, that's a different story. So where does the growth happen? It happens in urban municipalities. Again, you already have a tradition of city-centered growth. Build on that. A lot of the growth should take place in these joint planning areas because there's a lot of available land and a lot of opportunity for the municipalities involved to cooperate and come up with a good scheme for their development and servicing. Hamlets, a tradition in the region and a lifestyle. Some people want to live in a small rural town outside of the big city or outside of the big metropolitan region. So give some room for those hamlets to grow. And again, in each of these areas, including in the hamlets, focus on these preferred urban place types as opposed to traditional subdivisions or scattershot development. This is a chart that shows sort of what are the growth opportunities in each type of municipality. In an urban municipality like yours, again, there's a forecast of future potential growth that you're already expected to accommodate. There's some densities that we expect are going to be typical for those preferred place types in High River and other urban municipalities. There's a minimum density that you would expect you to be doing better than that typically. Employment areas are focused in urban municipalities and joint planning areas, and with a little of it allowed in hamlet growth areas, but overtly discouraged out in the countryside beyond cities, towns, joint planning areas, and hamlets. And then what's the proportion of new housing growth that should be in these preferred place types versus subdivisions? In Calgary, it's expected to be 90%, that 90% of the new growth is going to be in those preferred place types. And in your case, and the other urban municipalities, 75%. It's a percentage I think actually you're already achieving or maybe exceeding. Joint planning areas. Again, you will be involved in one of these if this plan is approved. It's an area where it'll be better if people cooperate and coordinate, and where the whole region doesn't need to pile on and figure out how this joint planning area should develop, although the board still has sway ultimately over municipal development plans. But the three municipalities involved should get together and do what we call a context study to figure out what should the land use planning be? What should the transportation system look like? Where are the critical natural resources? What about servicing? What's the most efficient way to do this? Are there areas that we should say are urban reserves and that we're going to save for later? So get together as colleagues, figure out a plan for the place, and then move forward with it. So again, here are the three as they are mapped today. An important asterisk here. We're proposing that the board adopt these joint planning areas from the outset when they adopt the growth plan, and that these maps are included and that we describe each of these joint planning areas. But it is expected that in the context planning process in which you and Foothills County and Okotoks would work together, that boundary might change, because that's what the joint planning should ascertain. Did we get this rough boundary right, or should it move a bit? And in fact, there's still discussions underway right now as to whether that particular joint planning area is one area or two, and its shape is still being debated as well. Again, I think we should get it as right as we possibly can at initial adoption by the board, but with the understanding that the context planning process is expected to refine the boundary. And then the board is also empowered under this proposed policy to be able to create new joint planning areas in the future. If a municipality or two or three get together and say, you know, we're getting a lot of growth pressure here, we're planning some servicing that might enable this area to grow, we ought to think about designating this as a joint planning area, taking it to the board, getting it approved, starting that context planning process. So I've teased some of your colleagues this way, Mayor Snodgrass. I'll tease you as well, which is that I'm here to deliver the unhappy news that participating in regional planning is a life sentence for as long as you're involved in leadership, because once you get started doing regional planning together, I don't think anyone ever stops unless the process utterly fails, and you don't want that. And so you'll be at this in the future with your colleagues, figuring out some of these changes, because the region will change over time. There'll be more growth in some place where we didn't expect it, and less growth in some other. And that's what happens. What do they say? If present trends continue, well, I'm here to tell you that that's not going to happen. That's why we call them present trends. They won't continue, but they'll change. Hamlet growth areas, we allow for some, again, much like joint planning areas, some of these to be designated at the outset in the plan map and in the documents to say, here are some hamlets that we already know about. The counties may want to position some of those as growth hamlets, do so, and we'll enshrine that in the plan, but also give the counties some opportunity to create new growth areas. Again, understanding there's a lifestyle to support, and that not all growth has to be urban. So we've been at some pains, particularly because the rurals have been really insistent about this, to make sure that we are clear about what can be done in rural areas, even though in some things like large new employment areas, we're also pretty clear about what shouldn't be done. And of course, there's some employment that naturally has to happen in farm-related areas like resource extraction and agriculture businesses. So that basic structure of urban growth in cities, towns, joint planning areas, and hamlets is the heart of this. We've created these place types and measurements to try to allow the region to track its progress. Tried to cover most things with that relatively simple toolkit, but of course there are going to be exceptions. There's going to be something that doesn't fit those receptacles, and so therefore there needs to be some kind of an exceptions process in the plan where the board can say, well, there's a demonstrated economic need for this. It's not inconsistent with the general direction of the plan, and we're not getting a request like this every other month. This isn't some pattern and practice that's going to undermine the plan. So the board should have a mechanism for approving exceptions on an exceptional basis. What do you get out of all of this? We hope you will get a more balanced and sustainable pattern of growth that uses resources and land more efficiently, and that uses dollars more efficiently, because there are never enough resources financially to cover everything as well. So that is where we are in the growth management and efficient use of land policy. As you know, that's where most of the debate and discussion has been in the development of this proposal. We thought it might be useful, if you'd like, Mayor, to stop there for a minute or two and have the board have the council ask questions and discuss any of these, and then we can move fairly swiftly through a summary of the other sections.
Yeah, you bet, Charlie. Yeah, give me a second to get back if I can see hands up. The JPA 3, Charlie, is one that council just recently discussed last week. Some members of council, anyways. You know the boundaries where with the Foothills trying, wanting to split it into two. Give me your thoughts on pros and cons of each from your perspective.
Stephen and Jonathan may have some thoughts about this as well, Mayor, but I think, first of all, we started into this consideration of JPA 3 because of the Afika partnership. That's a unique situation. You've got a large industrial area that's been planned for and is going to serve your population and Okotoks population and people from beyond your sub area of the region. But it also turns out there's potential for housing growth in there. You're working together with Okotoks and the county on water servicing that will serve areas, including but not limited to these JPAs. So I can understand the need to have the Afika area be pretty much its own JPA, and then the area, more northerly area around and to the east of Okotoks that will be served by the new water line, and will be more residential in character, to be its own JPA as well. I think either way, I think frankly, the consulting team feels strongly that that collective area should be in a JPA or two. And I know you and your staff have felt that way as well. There's been quite a bit of debate about that, but we put this in the plan because we thought it made sense.
Now,
Steve?
Charlie, would you continue with the FICA? Like, even if the JPAs are there, would you continue to have a FICA? Or would this JPA replace the FICA?
I think it would more supplement it, Mayor, than replace it, in that you have an existing ASP for a FICA. You've got some industrial development there already. You have some road infrastructure built to serve that intended pattern already. So I would hope that in general, and in this case too, being in a joint planning area means you continue with a plan like that, and you maybe do it more coherently together than you might have without having the discipline of joint planning.
Right. Okay. Appreciate it. Stephen or Jonathan?
Yeah, Steve, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. I would just add to that. The Afika partnership is one of the things that prompted the notion of a JPA in this area. And it's a demonstration of one of the ways the municipalities can work together. It's not the only way, but it is one of the ways. We did hear from the different municipalities differing, when we spoke to the administration, some differing views on how well that worked or didn't. But certainly it's a good framework as a starting point. And I think to Charlie's point, that it is really around supporting, the JPA would be supportive of that, and would sort of expand that Afika partnership into being a little stronger around some other land use planning, around some other servicing and that sort of thing, and just bring it all together. But really the intent of the joint planning area and the context study is to support the planning that has gone on already, and potentially expand it as necessary to make it fulsome. But it really would be a build on the Afika partnership. With regard to the 1 or 2 joint planning areas, we originally suggested 1 joint planning area for here. If it's 2, I don't think that's a big difference. I think the big thing that we wanted to see out of this was that neighboring municipalities who are affected by growth and development in an area work together, and that there'd be a framework for them to work together. So if it's 2 or if it's 3, I think either can work. And I think it really it's going to be contingent on the municipalities who are participating in those joint planning areas to make it work. And really the intent was to create a framework to have the municipalities work together.
Perfect. Thanks. Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just a thought as I'm reviewing this map in front of me is, I believe the current split would also split the Highway 2A ASP. So I'm not sure whether that's a factor. The proposed process, as you know, but as your council may not be fully aware, is to undertake a context study for each joint planning area. So given limited staff resources and timing, you may have a case, if you split the two, where the context study for one side gets done for say 3 or 4 first, and then amendments to that ASP may wish to move forward to align with the context study. In that case, you would then be amending only a portion of that ASP. And so there may be some benefit, and I'll put an opinion out there that together, as one, there may be some benefit if and when the case to amend that Highway 2 ASP comes out of a context study process. So there, that's one advantage to being together. Obviously, we really respect if the 3 municipalities agree to have 2, Obviously your staff and your councils have their reasons for that. And so, but since you asked the question, I'll give an opinion. And that may be one advantage to having a single one versus two, because you do have that ASP that is crossing the boundary. However, on the flip side, if you do have issues that are isolated to say High River in the county, and then issues isolated between Okotoks and the county, you can then separate those and deal with those on a bilateral basis instead of a trilateral basis. And so that would be the advantage perhaps, and perhaps that's why the two have resulted, so that you could kind of divide out in that way.
Appreciate it, Jonathan. I always like to keep Okotoks and Mayor Bill out of my kitchen, so it's just easier. And he feels the same way, I'm sure. I think it's just easier. I really like what you're saying, Jonathan, about that ASP and if you split things, but I was looking at it strictly from the standpoint of, if any changes were further north and didn't really impact High River at all, does it just muddy the waters if High River is involved with it? And do I want Okotoks involved if it's further south, right? So that's the only thing politically and easy wise, etc. So one other concern, Charlie, because I know this is a big one for council and they're not all up to speed on it, but maybe just because one of the big cruxes with this whole CMRB and the approval of this plan are the concerns from the rurals. And maybe you could just highlight what some of those are and why they're concerned about it and more than likely going to vote against any plan we put in place in front of them.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Well, we have worked hard to hear and to an extent respond to those concerns from the counties. And I say to an extent because I think there are a few issues where we as professional planners cannot agree to go in our recommendations. This is, of course, we're the consultants here, and ultimately the board will decide what version of this plan they choose to adopt. But the proposition that any property owner should be able to approach a county and get a subdivision approved anywhere, as long as servicing can be worked out, is, to us, not good regional planning. Good regional planning is about deciding where to concentrate growth and where to generally discourage it. And so a very wide open ad hoc approach to residential development, we've all seen it in lots of places, and we don't want to go there. So there's a philosophical development practice, property rights set of issues there where we have been more restrictive than some in county leadership or administration would like. However, on the other side of the ledger, we have tried through things like being able to both validate existing hamlets and provide for their growth, and to give some headroom for counties to be able to create new hamlets to provide for new small communities in the rural area. We think we have gained some appreciation and some sense of acknowledgement of their concerns by rural members of this big discussion. Again, whether that translates ultimately into a vote in favor or against the plan as the board finalizes it, still a little hard to tell. But I think, again, we've given a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of upside for the counties to participate in this process, as well as to make those tools work, just as there is for you. There's a lot of growth forecasted for these joint planning areas. That's going to rebound to the balance sheets and the hopes and dreams of those counties. there's an intangible here, which I guess I feel very strongly, having been involved in regional planning so long, is I know there's a concern and a fear that the big municipality will dominate everything and that the interests of rural communities won't be acknowledged. But my experience in regional planning is that by having the tradition of being at the table together and working things out together because you must, eventually enough goodwill develops and enough mutual understanding develops that that fear diminishes, and that rural leaders and rural residents see urban leaders paying attention to their legitimate concerns. That sounds a little Pollyannish and a little like, standing around singing Kumbaya. But again, I've seen it happen. And what we're trying to do with things like this joint planning area approach, and by the very fact that you're going to be doing periodic review of this plan, every 5 or 10 years, I believe that you'll replicate some of the experience that, say, Denver and Salt Lake and Portland metropolitan areas and Vancouver and Toronto have experienced, which is over time, the habits of the heart that come from working together start to turn out to mean real things in terms of, we can agree on how to fund this new road or transit project because we know how to work together. And that's down the road. But I believe that if we can get over the hump of initial adoption of this plan, that 10 years from now, you'll be telling some version of that story.
Perfect. Any questions from council before we move on? Thanks for that, Charlie. Continue on.
Okay, I'll put the PowerPoint back up if I can here. There it is. And I'll go down to where I'm supposed to be, which is right there. Okay. Jonathan, are you going to take economic well-being?
No, you're welcome to if you want to.
All right, I'll go ahead and take this one and save you for later. We're going to breeze through, if you will, Your Worship, just these other 5 areas, not because we don't want to talk about them, but because they're relatively simple compared to this very politically calibrated question of the pattern of growth. But there may be some interest in the council in discussing some of these. There's an economic well-being set of policies, some of which end up being expressed in the growth management section, like where can you have employment? But there's some general policies that matter a lot. One is municipalities in their MDP should make sure that there's enough buildable land for the employment growth that the region expects. You can have 1 million more people, you're gonna have hundreds of thousands of more jobs. Municipalities are under an obligation to make sure there's room to grow. You need a transportation system that can support that growth. That is both getting commuters to and from jobs that they still commute to in the future, and however many days a week people commute in the future. Good question there, but there will still be commuting. And one lesson learned and policy here is don't use up your regional transportation system accommodating single occupant vehicles driving long distances to work. Save some capacity in your regional transportation system for moving freight, agricultural products, and other elements of the economy. Make sure you've got a big, strong, robust transportation system to support all of that. Now, there's some things that this plan isn't, and one is it is not a regional transportation plan. You have sub-regional transportation plans now. We would certainly hope and recommend that you move from the adoption of a growth plan to a full regional transportation plan that includes transit, because that's an important next step of your work. It's also not a regional economic development strategy. It is more of a cooperative entrepreneurial effort, a good idea as well, and we hope that the region moves in that direction, but it is not contained within the regional growth plan. Steve or Jonathan, I'll let you take on environmentally responsible land use.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Charlie. So the environmentally responsible land use deals with things like flood-prone areas, which are important to High River, environmentally sensitive areas, a little bit on climate change. It revolves around the goals that were set by the board. And the goals in this particular area are recognizing the important role of natural systems and also taking a leadership role in regional planning to minimize the impacts on land, air, and water. Next slide. So looking at the policies, the first one, again, one that's very near and dear to High River is flood-prone areas. And there's been a lot of discussion and debate on this, but how far it should go, with some municipalities wanting to simply leave it with the status quo as the provincial regulations currently see it. And I know others, and High River among them, are really advocating for the design flood to move the 1 in 200 year flood. In the end, the policies that we've landed on are somewhat in between. So we're saying that there be no development in provincially designated floodways. So that's the current 1 in 100 year designation. That there be flood protection to mitigate risks in the 1 in 100 year flood area. So in the flood fringe, sorry, for the 1 in 100 year event, where we've introduced some new approaches, as we're saying, in new greenfield development will need protection for the 1 in 200 year event level, and that the CMRB should work with the province to investigate changing the provincial definition to the 1 in 200 year design flood. Okay, next slide. Another area that's had some, not agreement across the board, I would say, is environmentally sensitive areas. And again, some wanting to leave it fairly basic around some mapping, and others wanting to get into fairly detailed integrated watershed management planning. And again, our policy sits somewhere in the middle. We are suggesting that ASPs and ARPs need to identify those environmentally sensitive areas, and we have a definition for environmentally sensitive areas. Where there is interaction with an environmentally sensitive area in one of these statutory plans, that an environmental study be undertaken to document the effects and to recommend mitigation. We're saying that municipal development plans need to map these environmentally sensitive areas where there's going to be future growth, and that the CMRB compile a database of those ESAs that are identified in the other statutory plans. And then finally, that the municipal development plans address elements of eco-infrastructure. There's also a section on climate change. It's relatively small, but it does include some things that many municipalities are already doing, but it sort of entrenches them, and that is that the municipal development plan should have a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and water consumption, and that there be policies to mitigate, identify and mitigate the risks of climate change. So moving into our next policy area, which is water stewardship. This is one that's of great interest, and probably greater interest than we can address in the growth plan. Really, this is the starting point for some of these discussions, and water and water stewardship being one of them. That it's a really important topic, and probably is one of the important things to continue moving forward on after the growth plan is finished. But in terms of the goals for the region, these are not necessarily the goals for the growth plan, but the goals for the region. Having a water strategy that promotes healthy people and ecosystems and speaks to resiliency in times of drought and flood, and also a coordinated approach to water, wastewater, and stormwater for the region. In terms of policy, it doesn't have a lot of very detailed policy. First off, there's a strong connection with the servicing plan. It also recommends some direction for future planning and future work. And again, the growth plan by itself is not going to solve the region's water problems, but rather sets the stage for how to start addressing them and going forward. But it does include some basic policies around advocating for headwater protection, continuing assessment of upstream reservoirs, having regional leadership around stormwater management, addressing impacts on regional infrastructure with the stormwater management approaches, improving the use of water, and some direction around collaboration and governance. And believe it or not, there is actually some disagreement in terms of how far that should go. But we think that there needs to at least be the start to collaboration on governance and that sort of thing at a regional and sub-regional level. And that really goes to some of the joint planning area work, in addition to broader full regional discussions. Moving on to shared services optimization, as the title of this policy area suggests, it's got a much stronger connection to the servicing plan than the growth plan. But in terms of the goals, it speaks to trying to look at borderless delivery. Next slide, Charlie. Borderless delivery of services. Speaking to a fair benefit cost model, it doesn't mean that there's a requirement to look at benefits and costs and shared benefits and costs in every case, but to at least consider them, much like your FICA model seeks to at least consider that. And then service delivery in a more efficient and sustainable way through optimization and sharing and collaboration in delivering services. So in terms of the policy highlights, again, the strong connection back to the servicing plan, and there are really three areas, and we've actually reduced the recreation component in the growth plan, but there are three areas that we're highlighting, one being transportation corridors, and really in terms of on the growth plan side of it, is making sure we optimize the benefits of these transportation corridors, these regional transportation corridors, whether it be trade corridors, commuting corridors, transit corridors, whatever the case may be, and then also to mitigate the impacts on the corridors. Speaking to supporting transit and transit-oriented development at a regional level where regional transit corridors exist. If they don't exist, then obviously you don't need to address the transit-oriented development piece. And then coordinating between regional active transportation and recreation corridors. The recreation piece we have since moved into the entirely into the servicing plan. The policies we had in the growth plan in the first draft were probably a bit of a stretch. We have addressed energy and utility corridors in the growth plan, and really it's the same definitions and same policies as are in the interim growth plan. And with that, I will turn it over to Jonathan.
You want to talk about rural-urban differences a little bit?
Yeah, so this is the section, I think we missed the heading there, but it's rural urban differences, and the emphasis is really within the plan to work better together, and I think that's the vision. Previously, there was some policies within this section around economic well-being for agricultural in rural areas, and those have since we've kind of wisened up to including those within the economic section of the plan. And so the emphasis within this section is really on those rural areas and how to work together, really. And so I think Charlie here is then going to summarize us up and conclude.
Thank you. Sorry, too fast on the trigger there. So again, we hope that that down the stretch, maybe in this plan, if the extension is granted, we might actually get to meet in person again to validate some of the work that's been done and to negotiate some of the final actions that you'll be taking or that the board will be taking. But I just again want to say, despite this restriction of having to do all these meetings this way, as I know all of you do in both your council service and in your work lives, we all have way too many Zoom and WebEx meetings every day and way too few actual face-to-face negotiations and conversations. But nevertheless, we're very happy about where this plan is. We think this plan is going to make a significant difference for the Calgary region. We think that the innovations that are in it are going to be well suited to the unique nature of the Calgary region. For example, other plans have relied a lot on agreeing in advance where the big transit lines are going to go and on drawing a very strict urban growth boundary. Neither of those moves, in our opinion, is very appropriate in your case. You're still trying to determine how regional transit might be shaped. And in an area, in a region where you have 7,000 square kilometers of farmland, strictly conserving farmland is not as high an objective as it is in some place like the Willamette Valley in Oregon. So instead, this approach of saying, here are the preferred growth areas, put most of your growth here and shape its character to be more like these place types and less like those. And then in these areas where They're a bit gray today in terms of their future, work together cooperatively, sub-regionally. So this idea of enshrining sub-regional planning in the regional growth plan, and this idea of focusing on the positives of the good place types are innovations in your plan compared to the ones that have been done in other regions. We're proud of those innovations that we've built together in all our many discussions with you, and we think they're especially well suited for the Calgary region. So we wish you good luck and Godspeed down the stretch here in resolving the rest of these issues. Obviously, we will be working with you through that remaining months, if that's what it is, if the extension's granted. But we're bullish about this plan, and we think it stands to serve you well. And with that, again, Mayor, we're available for more questions and discussions as you and the council have time and willingness.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Charlie. Council, if you have any questions, just raise your hand. Councillor Masterman.
Thanks very much, Mayor Snodgrass, and thanks, Mr. Hales, and your team for the presentation. As you know, I'm not on CMRB, so a lot of this is great education for me. I just I do have a couple of very specific questions, and one relating to water stewardship. And many of you will recall that after the flood of 2013, there was all kinds of ideas about, well, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? You know, we heard lots of ideas about the Highwood River. You know, we need to dam it. We need to have off-stream storage. We need to build a big canal and divert the river around High River so that it doesn't come through High River. Like, it's a reason many of us moved to this town. And so obviously those were concerns at the time. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed, and we were able to do a lot of stuff mitigation wise, and thanks to the provincial government and our administration and for council. But when I see in section 3411 where it refers to CMRB will support continued assessment of upstream reservoirs on the region's rivers to provide water storage and flood mitigation. I guess I just get a little nervous seeing that actually entrenched in a policy. And I know it just says assessment. It doesn't say, you know, it will happen. I know that, but I also know that sometimes it's a pretty small step from policy to actually something happening. And you know, I know that you know, upstream of Calgary in the Springbank area, diversion and off-stream storage is being looked at with hearings about to begin. And but I guess I'd just like to maybe hear from you, and then I have one more question after that. Hear from one of you, or on just you know, my concerns that this, you know, would actually be part of the policy and maybe would be something that would happen in High River. So
yeah, I see Jamie, CMRB administration might want to comment on this as well as Steve, but let me give you a planning answer first, and then the specific question about how specific we were going to get in this policy is something that's been debated a bit. I think it used to be the case in the Calgary region, as it was in Portland and many others, that one managed growth by controlling the water. That has never really worked out terribly well in most places. What works better, in my opinion and in my experience, is plan the growth and then manage the water. Because if you plan the growth pattern, and all in the region have agreed that this is going to be the growth pattern, then getting to the water, both the flooding issues and the resourcing issues for domestic water, bad pun, flows from that. And that's my approach, and that's why I would not recommend trying to bolt down a lot of things in servicing at the front end of a growth plan, but instead set the stage for the pattern of how you want to grow, and then set the table for negotiating how you're going to manage those things. But both James and Steve may want to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. I'll quickly answer, then pass it on to Jamie, because I think she'll have some perspectives as well. But this has been one of those discussions, and at one time that language did say we'll support development of upstream reservoirs, and through discussion it was decided amongst the various members of municipal administration that sit around the table, as well as the Land Use and Servicing Committee, that the term assessment was probably a better one. And I think there's probably it's prudent, I think, to continue to assess the need or lack of need for upstream reservoirs. And certainly some municipalities have a very strong feeling about the need for them, others less so. But that's why the word is assess, not develop. And I think it continues to be important to look at keep all options on the table when you start looking at flood mitigation and drought mitigation, because that's also the another side of upstream reservoirs. And so basically what we're saying is continue to assess them, leave all options on the table, and certainly we're not saying develop them as has been suggested by some municipalities, but rather to continue supporting the assessment. And I think that really just leaves the door open for whatever the case may be. And Jamie, did you want to add anything else?
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for the question, Councillor. Just wanted to add a little commentary on when that policy was written. It was in general around the Elbow River and the Bow Rivers, which I imagine you inferred, but also your point is taken. As well in our flood policy as it stands right now, it talks about achieving that 1 in 200 in a cumulative manner. And so there may be many tools that are used in order to achieve that. So I just wanted to add those commentary to the context as Charlie and Steve mentioned. I hope that is helpful and answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Snodgrass, do you mind if I ask my second question? Go ahead. So, and thanks for that clarification, Jamie, on of course, it was the elbow. I meant to say the elbow, not the bow, which I think I referred to. But my other question is related to First Nations involvement in this plan, and it probably goes very basic into the makeup of the CMRB, and I think I was a little concerned. In the introduction, it talks about 4 First Nations within the CMR and the Métis Nation Region 3 as well, but then as far as public consultation goes, it kind of talks about how COVID disrupted or didn't allow as robust a public consultation with the First Nations as you would have liked. There was some discussion, but and there's certainly some interest and interest in sort of being involved going forward. My question is probably not a fair one, because it may have been made well beyond you guys, your team. But why weren't First Nations at the table on CMRB from the beginning?
I think I'm probably best positioned to respond to that question, Councillor, and thank you very much for it. I think the main reason is that this was set up through the Department of Municipal Affairs by the Government of Alberta. And when the growth and servicing plans are done, and in particular the growth plan, it is a statutory plan which will bind all 10 member municipalities to it. The province has no authority to require Indigenous nations to participate in a planning exercise such as that. And so to, I would say, formally include people at the table on whom the plan would not be binding, but that they have decision-making authority, creates a little bit of an imbalance of power. And so, the board has been very supportive in terms of administration reaching out. We've had the opportunity to meet with Stoney Nakoda, with Tsuut'ina, and with Siksika nations, and either with councillors or with the chief or with administration, to update them and give them a better sense of the work that we're undertaking, and really looking toward areas of collaboration in the future. And every time we've met, there's definitely been an interest and an openness to collaboration and working together as we progress.
Okay, yeah, no, thanks for that. I think I wasn't really talking about a requirement that they be there, which of course nobody can make them do that. But just the invitation to be at the table, which I appreciate, would have been made. And I'm very tempted to put Mr. Clark on the spot by asking him, but I'm not going to do that. So thanks.
Councillor Cooey.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass, and thanks very much for the presentation. Like Councillor Masterman, I don't sit on the CMRB, so I found this incredibly informative and understandable. So I thank you for that. Simple. My first comment, and it may have been written this way, so please, whether it's your staff or our staff, or other councillors that want to say, no, it should stay that way. I find the last sentence in High River's write-up a bit negative. When I look at some of the other communities, and not negative, but I guess I wondered if it could be changed to saying something about enhanced flood mitigation measures to protect the future community. It just, I don't know, there's something that seems to be missing for me, and I was hoping that we could maybe enhance that a little bit. But for the most part, I appreciate the enormity of this and the challenges that you and your team have faced, and the municipalities working together to pull this together. I suspect you all earned your keep. But when I hear from other members of council involved in our staff, their disappointment, and no fault to your team at all. I believe it's to the politicians sitting around that table, that the strength of some of these policies have been reduced. I do hope that going forward, once it's approved, once we see the plan move forward and see there being some collaboration, that maybe the plan can be revisited and some of those stronger essences be brought back into the plan. But I just thank you again for the presentation. Just that one comment, I wanted just to reiterate that we have certainly heard some concerns about the strength of some of the policies being depleted in order to accommodate all of the players at the table. So thank you.
Well, maybe just a slightly different way to say what I said earlier, but maybe better. As professional planners, we think this is a good plan. Is it as strong as we might have written if we were left completely on our own? Of course not. This is a political document, and there has to be at least majority agreement to move it forward. But in my opinion, again, having been through this for 30 years in my own region and seeing it done elsewhere, this is a really solid plan because it focuses you on these areas and with these place types in a pretty aggressive way. I mean, you committing yourself to 75% of your future growth being in these more positive forms than the traditional subdivision. That's a significant commitment on your part, as it is for the other municipalities. As Peter often says, you were already starting with a history of well-planned growth in the region. You're not dealing in mitigating a catastrophe that's already occurred because of a lot of terrible sprawl and bad development. You've mostly done good developments in reasonable places. The first, in my opinion, short way to say this, the first iteration of the plan doesn't have to be as strong as the later iterations might be for you to still get very good results. And I believe what you'll find over time, if people get used to positive collaboration working well, is that you'll strengthen some things. And finally, I'll just say, this scares some people when I say this, but you might take on topics regionally that aren't in the first version of the plan. The first version of the Portland Regional Plan said nothing at all about recreation in natural areas other than, protect the important ones. Later, we have a regional green spaces system that we've all agreed upon. The first version of the Portland Metropolitan Plan did nothing about housing, and now there's a regional housing effort. So over time, you might strengthen this plan by, if not unanimous agreement, at least by majority agreement.
Councillor McMillan.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass, and thank you very much, Charlie, and all of your team. I greatly appreciate that. Speaking to, ironically, I had the same kind of comment that Councillor Cooey had regarding the 2.1.3.6 statement. I agree that I also found that that was, when I read about all the other municipalities, High River has the only one that has kind of a negative connotation with the comment saying the area is subject to flooding. So I would appreciate more of just the kind of the enhancement. We've worked very hard on flood mitigation. So I think I'd like to see that changed. And also I had a question similar to Councillor Masterman's around the Indigenous representatives. On 1.4.4, it does say that areas of mutual interest did come up. And I was just wondering, what were those areas of mutual interest when you were meeting with First Nations?
Jordan should probably answer that. Jordan.
Maybe before Jordan comes on, I'll just quickly address the first question. You're absolutely right. We agree that the initial write-up for High River did end kind of a little negatively. The new version that went out to the board today has a different write-up for High River. Thanks to the staff in High River for putting that together for us. So that's been addressed. But I'll turn it over to Jordan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Yeah, so a lot of it is looking forward as we progress into looking at service delivery and whether or not there's areas for collaboration in those kinds of things. We didn't really, we're given that the focus right now is really on the land use planning and delivering on the requirements from the province, and also on delivering the best plan we can for the region, and recognizing that the servicing plan is a framework as we go forward. We anticipate a lot more collaboration on a go forward basis as we find areas where hey, it works really well, and maybe we can work together on whatever that service would be, or whatever an area of common interest would be. But definitely we found in all the meetings that there was that interest to work together. It was more just, what exactly does it look like? It hasn't fully been fleshed out yet.
Okay, thank you. And Mayor Snodgrass, may I ask another question, please? So reading through the report, and once again, to reiterate what Councillor Cooey said, I really admire everyone who's been involved, because to try to make everyone happy or agreeable is quite a challenge. I do find it interesting that the focus is definitely on greenfield development, and just thinking about the whole environmental asset and stewardship. I'm just kind of curious about, I didn't see any mention of any sort of brownfield redevelopment for future growth. So is that kind of something that would be considered for the future?
Very much so. And in fact, there is almost an implicit emphasis on infill in this plan, in that you're doing it, other municipalities are doing it, and it's addressed lightly, not because it's not extremely useful and the most valid form of urban development to reuse old land again, but frankly, it doesn't need to be regulated much by the region. If you figure out a way to redevelop a brownfield in High River, bless you and go with God and get it done, right? Because the rest of the region is benefited by you doing that, and the rest of the region doesn't need to weigh in on encouraging you to do that. In general, there's a lot of good infill work already being done in the municipalities. Particularly, of course, when it comes to brownfields, as you know, they're tricky because they're expensive to redevelop. And so it requires usually very adroit financial work by your administration to figure out how to make it work for a developer to redo a brownfield, and there are big regulatory hurdles to clear. I think it could happen later in your planning process where you are able to make the case regionally that that you're absorbing less land regionally because you're doing a better job with infill and a higher yield of mixed use than you forecasted at the beginning. As we've all seen, mixed use takes a while to get accepted in the marketplace. And as it does, you know, it generally gets denser. So we've set those density targets at a modest stretch, but you might yet exceed them. Finally, I'm sorry, I'm being a little long-winded here, but you know, in my own experience in Portland, we absorbed 20,000 more people in downtown Portland because we figured out how to take an old rail yard and make it into a neighborhood. The rest of the region, in a sense, said, thank you, we don't have to expand as much.
Definitely, because that's, I really appreciate your insight, Charlie, because when I was reading this, I know I kind of have, you know, these dreams, but I thought, oh, maybe a brownfield task force could somehow come out of this one day. So, and, you know, with the collaboration. So thank you very much for your insight.
Certainly could.
Councillor Nychuk.
Can I add? Sorry, Your Worship.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that because yourself as the mayor and your other representative, the other councils may not be aware that existing area structure plans are grandfathered. And so the grandfathering of existing area structure plans, on the one hand, it encourages those areas to develop first because they don't need regional plan approval. Then a developer who has an existing ASP can go ahead and move forward with that development, and they're not faced with having to go through the process of going to the region for an approval. So in that sense, it encourages infill, I would say, sort of implicit in the plan. However, the grandfathering effect also has the effect of limiting somewhat the ability of the growth plan to mandate that existing areas have infill policy. So in that sense, those grandfather plans are somewhat fixed unless that developer comes forward with an amendment. So on the one hand, it encourages grandfathered ASPs to move ahead because they have a quicker path, you might say. On the other hand, the growth plan has to stay somewhat silent on that issue because those are grandfathered, if that makes some sense. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
Yep, no, it's fine. Thanks, Jonathan. Councillor Nychuk.
Two things, just a point. I guess first thing, thank you for the presentation, all the information. My first point was when I was reading this, came across section 2.2, table 1, the population projection. Between Airdrie and Calgary, your 2018 number is reversed. I don't know if you guys fixed that going forward, but Airdrie, I don't think ever had 1.3 million population. But anyway, just a little something that it's easy to miss stuff, and when there's so many eyes on it, you know. Anyway, and the other one is to come back to Councillor Masterman's point on Indigenous people. I'm not sure if this is a comment or a question, and I know it comes from a higher level of governance. But being that this is a regional growth plan, and those nations are part of the region, to me, it just makes sense that they're not consulted, that they're part of it. If this is a long-term plan, really, in my opinion, somehow they should be included. I know that's not your purvey to change how that interacts, but perhaps it's part of what you do to push back on the government, either provincially or federally, and say, hey, listen, if we're truly trying to be inclusive, we've got people here and lands here that are integral to the growth going forward and are just as important as any of these municipalities and how that moves forward. You know, just to add to what Councillor Masterman said, I think it's critically important, and I appreciate the fact that they've been consulted and they've been talked to. But if we're going to truly move forward as a region, a province, as a nation, I think that kind of stuff is critically important to change. They want to be part of governance as a whole, and they want to be part of their own governance. So somehow we have to find that happy place, and perhaps that I'm not part of the from a counselor's perspective in this, but those would be my comments on that particular situation, because there are 4 of those First Nations that are in this regional collaborations. Thank you for hearing my comment.
Yeah, good point.
Thank you, Councillor. I think the only comment I would have in response to that is that the board has been very clear that they are looking for ongoing engagement. It's not, and meaningful engagement. So we look at this as something that will happen in perpetuity through the life of the board.
Councillor, Greg Clark here, and if I might just weigh in, and I know Councillor Masterman asked a similar question, and I agree. It's something that I've talked about with administration and has come up in my conversations with board members, and we just had a brief discussion about that connection at the last governance committee meeting, and so it's something I certainly put a high level of importance on as well, and I can assure you that's something that as a board we will continue to pursue and take a very active approach to engaging with Indigenous nations going forward. It is important we find ways to work together, and this is another one.
Yeah, thanks for that. There was no insinuation that you weren't, that government weren't, but it's so critically important to bring them in as we all move forward together. So thank you for
that. No further questions. Thanks very much, guys. Thanks, Charlie. So just so that everybody in council knows, Charlie is the former mayor of Portland. He's the one that made Portland weird. It's all about Charlie. And if you remember, and I talked to Charlie when we first came on board, but after the flood and we were redeveloping a lot of High River with our Pratt community or our Pratt committee, Portland was one of the cities that we looked at almost on a daily basis as to what had been done in Portland and the successes that Portland had, and a lot of it, whether we actually did it, a lot of the inspiration of what we've done in High River came directly out of a lot of the work that Charlie did, because we want High River to be just as weird or weirder than Portland. So we're good with that.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Portland might have made me weird in return, so it's probably a fair bargain.
But again, going back to the challenges this board has had, especially with COVID and trying to do these engagements, a lot of good stuff was happening around those round tables and all being in the same room. And these Zoom meetings, there's a lot of good to them sometimes, especially those of us that are trying to run businesses and do this stuff at the same time. It gives you a little more flexibility. But when you're trying to be innovative and creative and all these things, boy, you sure miss the human interaction direct. But I'll say that, Charlie and Steve and Jonathan, your guys' whole team, you've done one hell of a job in working with this, and Jordan, Jamie, Lisa, Greg on board now, and the work that Chris did. Everybody's done a pretty amazing job of going through this over the last year to come up with a plan that's hopefully going to be voted on in a few more months here, a couple more months. So but we're looking good. There's always going to be differences, but we're further along with it than without it. There's no question. So thanks very much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thanks so much.
Take care. Okay, just in relation with time, Sarah, this next one, the bike park, I'm just going to throw it open for any questions from council right now without a presentation. Everybody knows what this is all about. We don't need to go back through it. So any questions from council? If not, I'm just going to go through the recommendations. Councillor Masterman.
Sorry, Mayor Snodgrass. I know. I guess so. The one question I was going to ask is, I know the grant was a big help. I guess I'm just wondering, and I didn't see it in the report, kind of how much has been raised. I know they're looking for a matching grant for the 75 that came from Cargill, but I'm just wondering how much more money. They've been raising money for a long time. How much more do they already have raised, and how much do they need? I thought it was about 200, but if somebody, if somebody has that, great, and if not, I can wait for the response.
I believe that you were correct that it is about 200. They didn't specifically say that in their letter. They just said the 75,000, which is the most major donation they have received. What staff was specifically concerned about is at what point do they have enough money to go forward with the notice of decision? And they confirmed that the 75,000 would be enough for them to move ahead with hiring Vela Solutions to ensure that they can meet the 6-month extension. And Kara has just sent me a message saying that in December, their total was just over $100,000. Yes. So in essence, that was our key factor was, do they have enough money right now to meet all of the prior to release conditions? And they have confirmed that in their letter.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
I just looked on their website. Yeah, Kara's right. It looks like about 110 is what they've got available right now. So, Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. They've got a big banner on the fence right at the location, and it's about 110,000. So they had about 35,000 more than the 75,000, and they're applying for matching grants for the amount of money that they have raised. And so, and I think their final total that they want is 250,000. So
that's what's on their website, is 250.
Okay.
Yeah.
The 75 was a big kicker because as far as fundraising goes, because a lot of people they don't want to put money towards something until they kind of know there's an anchor there that's going to really get it going, so that when they put their $2,500 to it, they want to know that it's going to actually happen and not just sit there for another 20 years, right? So
right.
75 was a big deal to get this thing going.
Thank you.
No further questions that I have on that. So ask for a motion from Councillor Nychuk. The council waived the extension fee of $225 as per rate bylaw 3494/2021 to provide an extension of 6 months for the prior to release conditions.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make that motion for you. Can I just add a comment after that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Under the general section of the request for decision, waiving the development permit fee will mean that the fee is being subsidized by the taxpayers. Maybe Chris wants to jump in on this one, but I don't think it's really a subsidization because the fee is a matter of internal process with development and administration. So the fee doesn't exist really unless it's put forward. I'm confused by that. I don't know how the taxpayer subsidizes a fee that exists in theory that's applicable coming from us, the town of High River. If we don't charge it, it doesn't exist. Or are we saying that the town of High River is paying the $225 on behalf of? That's not what it is, I'm sure. Just some clarity to the written word would be good.
Mr. Mayor, I won't call you your worship like the previous group, so I'll leave that one alone. to Councillor Nychuk, it is kind of a subsidization because there is staff time expended out to prepare the extension notice and to advise other individuals that may have stated a concern about the project, to advise them that it's being extended. So there is staff time that's expended, and that fee is intended to cover the cost of those costs. If that makes sense to you.
Sort of.
So it is kind of a subsidization from the taxpayers.
Yeah.
$10 is $10.
If you're billing it out and invoicing it, if you're just eating it, you're eating it. And maybe municipal bookkeeping is different than private business bookkeeping.
Yes.
Because to me, that I would just eat that fee. I don't internalize it somewhere else. It's so that's where I'm coming from. Sorry for the confusion, and thanks for your explanation.
Okay, motion's on the floor. All in favor? Carried. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Stewart, assessment, and the copter.
Good afternoon, Mayor Snodgrass, members of council, administration. I guess here today to talk to you a little bit about the copter regulation. I've got a PowerPoint here. I'll fire that up. I'm not a very great proficient Zoom person, so I'll do my best. So try this. Share. Uh-oh. There we go. And there, can you guys see that?
You did it.
Can you guys see that or not?
Yep.
You can? Oh, sorry.
We got her.
Oh yeah, there we go. So copter, so I'll be as brief and to the point as I can about copter.
Perfect.
Under 362 of the Municipal Government Act, it's called exemptions for government, churches and other bodies. So for assessment purposes, buildings, government buildings, hospitals, schools, and the like, libraries, anything owned by the Ag Societies, they're automatically exempt by regulation. But there is a section of 362, we call it 362(1)(n). So that's an exemption that's extended to not-for-profit groups, of which we have 14 who've successfully applied for the exemption in High River. So copter means community organization property tax exempt regulation. And it's interesting, the conversation we've had today about regionalizing or thinking more as a group, because in the past, many years ago, some municipalities would grant one not-for-profit an exemption, where a municipality down the road didn't. And so the government stepped in and they created this copter guide to provide some consistency between municipalities granting exemptions to various not-for-profit groups. So in essence, what copter means, the basis for determining the exemption is that the facilities, accessibility, and the public benefit that arises from its use. So the copter guidelines, it's kind of complex, but it's at the same time, it's fairly straightforward. So it's got to be for a public, a benevolent and charitable purpose. And about 60% of the purpose of the group is for that. So there are no restrictions. Go to the next slide. So there's no restrictions on based on race, culture, ethnic origin, religious belief. So it's wide open to the public, right? In the community in which property exists. And typically for not-for-profit, there's nominal fees, like anybody can access it for a nominal fee. So it's wide open to the public. Typically volunteers are organizing activities and events in and around the not-for-profit. That oftentimes have a fundraising component. Lots of times within copter, certainly focus on the youth. and community care for the disadvantaged. So it's an opportunity for the community to offer exemptions to various groups providing a public benefit. So in High River, what we do every year is we place an ad in the High River Times and the Crier, and we're extending the opportunity for not-for-profit groups to apply for exemption under Copter. So the applications are required to be submitted no later than September 30th of every year. So this ad is for groups in town who are new or may not have heard about Copter before and say, hey, you know what, maybe we qualify for this. We're going to ask some questions, right? We think we're a benevolent purpose, you know, what the services we offer aren't just for us. We're offering a public benefit, a benefit to the public. So they can apply. And oftentimes each year I get at least one or two groups who apply and asking if they would qualify for the exemption. So this ad is intended for new applicants. Now, we also have existing properties that are exempt under Copter. And so every year we send out a renewal. So we're asking them, has there been any changes to your organization? Are you still not for profit? Are you a society? You're still operating under the parameters of the legislation, like for the public benefit. We're asking if there's any change in address, or if they're using a building, have you gone from the whole building being used for that purpose, and now you're kind of scaled back and you're only using half of the building. So perhaps instead of getting an exemption for the whole building, perhaps you're only going to get an exemption for half of the building. So we're taking in applications that have to be submitted by September 30th. And again, we send this letter. We just started last year sending this letter out just to make sure that the organizations who are already exempt and there's been no changes. So in the town of High River, we have 14 groups altogether. As members of council, we've presented many of these groups to you before. So we have SNAPS providing special needs associations for parents and siblings. We have the Thrift Store provided for the Salvation Army, Abbeyfield Home House for seniors residents, Foothills Advocacy and Motion. And you know, as you read these, you go, oh yeah, these are groups like they're community based, like they're definitely offering something that nobody else offers, and it's open to everybody. So as I read through, that's what I do. I go, yeah, you bet, these are community groups, right? We've got Narrow Road Home, who are a shelter and recovery center. Rowan House, you all are aware of that one, the women's emergency shelter. The High River District Friendship Center, a meeting place for seniors. Unfortunately, a lot of these facilities haven't been able to be used this last year. We've got the High River Masonic Temple and the Independent Order of Oddfellows. You know, in past years, these, and we used to call them the animal clubs, weren't typically exempt under the regulation, but they came, the Masonic Lodge and the Oddfellows came the second year I was here, and they really do a lot of work for the community. Like they offer their building for instance, the Masonic Lodge, Senator Riley has a key, the fire department has a key. Like they go, you want to use our lodge? Go right ahead, no charge, right? Well, sometimes they'll just charge for power. You know, a lot of these groups typically in the past were exclusive, right? But with changing times, they've really opened up and tried to offer community benefits. So I'll show you how they qualify at the end here for, it's only a partial exemption. We got the High River Food for Thought, so provide free lunches for children. Museum of the Highwood, High River Performing Arts Foundation, that's kind of a more recent application. And the Sunset Drive-In. You know, like that's a classic example too, right? A bunch of people got together, they threw some seed money in, they built a drive-in theater, and they collaborate with the public, and charity groups can make money from having drive-in. Like it's definitely a community benefit. This year, the Highwood Golf and Country Club applied for an exemption. They wanted a full exemption for the golf course. This one took a bit of work because it's kind of an unusual. And again, I won't go into any details. If any of you have any questions about any of these, by all means, give me a call. Like, this is public knowledge, and that's what we're presenting to you today. But the golf course, predominantly, it's in place to provide golf for its membership. So it has the fees are not, they're not overall, the fees aren't low. Not anybody in town can walk onto the golf course and say, I want to play a game of golf with my kids. It's the fees are a little restrictive, right? And the fact that the membership, golf is to the membership first. So we did a lot of work with the golf course, and the Spitzy 6, I believe I got a guide here, the last year to play in a Spitzy 6 was $13.50. I think they bumped it up for this last year, like $20. So it's fairly affordable. And it is located on the south side of the berm. And so I consulted with other peers that I often consult with. And the golf course is very, very forthcoming with providing information. So we did grant them a partial exemption on that Spitzy 6. And there's a couple of greens. And that's fairly readily available. Like, it doesn't restrict by use. Anybody can go on there. You know, I think that's fairly reasonable. Like, we did lots of work with them, and I think that's fair. So here's a spreadsheet of all of the groups that we just mentioned. So again, this is the group, like from 1 through 14, and their address. And on the right side here, that's the total assessment, the total assessed value of each of these buildings. This is an estimate, like we're still working on the year end, but pretty close. And then on the first yellow column here, that's the exempt portion of that assessment. So like the snaps, it's in the building here at 125 4th Avenue. It's not entirely rented by snaps. So some of it's rented to a business. So that's taxable, right? So that's partially exempt. So then 2 through 7 is fully exempt. Here's the Masonic Lodge. So they're exempt by 542 and change, and they pay taxes on 135 and change. And same goes for the Independent Order of Odd Fellows. They've got partial exemption based on its use. Museum of the Highwood, it's partially taxable because that's where Walker's Western Wear is. So that portion is taxable. And then Highwood Performing Arts Foundation, it basically is just a vacant lot. A Sunset Drive-In, so it's exempt. And then here's the golf course. It's got, I believe, 6 roll numbers. And the Spitzy 6 is located on this one roll. So they've been exempted 241,000, and the remaining 4.8 million is taxable. So that's our grand total of exemptions afforded to community groups within High River following COPTR, right? It's a guide. Like, I phoned Alberta Municipal Affairs. I believe you guys have probably phoned them before. You always get the same answer on every phone call, right? So I asked them, well, how about a golf course? Well, it can depend, you know, and so that's why it's a guide, the COPTR guide. It's not black and white. So we do our job in assessment as the appointed assessor for the town, do the best job to make sure that the applications or what's granted is consistent, it's acceptable under COPTR, and it's under the auspices of a charitable and benevolent service to the community. So we've tried to always look at it in that manner. So that kind of concludes this. Like, we'll post this on the website. You go to any municipality in Alberta, you can look up what groups are exempt under COPTR. So we'll do that, but we don't want to explain who they are to you, the council.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Now, these groups being able to get on this list, is that just, you know, you go through it and you choose and you approve whether they get it or not, or is this something that comes back to council, or is it just staff choice?
Well,
staff assessment.
We've typically done it like when I first came to town. There were some organizations, most of them on that list, that were exempt. but they've been exempt for years and hadn't been reviewed. You know, we try to do every year look at the ones that are existing. New applications, you know what, to be honest with you, it can be different in some municipalities, but most times I believe the regulation says it's the assessor that reviews it, and then we present it to council. We can certainly, like, I don't believe it's black and white.
Yeah, no, I'm not challenging it. It's just a question as to kind of how it's done. So one piece on the golf course, that's 6 holes. Like, I can support that because there's a big flood benefit to they're unprotected, and it was part of our mitigation plan, those 6 holes. So the little bit they get out of that is probably good. I do have some concerns on a couple of the other ones, but I'll let Jamie go first.
Yeah, mine focuses around the golf course. My understanding was that Spitzy 6 is no longer, and that they're making it back into a 9-hole course. And I guess overall, that's still a for-profit business. I realize they're not making much profit these days because they're having a tough time over there. But I heard your explanation, Stuart, and I can support you. But I would look at it harder again next year, because this is previous year assessment value, correct? So if they open it up into a full-blown 9, then we would reevaluate that in 2021, I assume.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Councillor Kinghorn. Like, we'll be reviewing these every year. I did share the golf course decision with them last week, and I think they were really wanting full exemption, and there's no way, right, that they would qualify. Like, yeah, and I've checked around, like in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat. There's some golf courses that have exemption, like Henderson Lake and in Lethbridge is exempt, but no one knows how come they got it, right? So it was in place before the current assessors are on site. So yeah.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time, everybody.
The golf course is a non-profit.
That's right.
They are non-profit, but they are also probably the only non-profit golf course left in Alberta. But they do have that status.
That's correct.
That's what everybody does, Jamie. A couple more questions for you, Stuart. Councillor Masterman.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass, and I've actually got 2 questions, and but I just want to point out to start that this list actually is, you know, we approve this list, and we're saying the rest of the taxpayers will subsidize these other organizations. So I think this is a true subsidization, and which is fine. But I've got a couple of questions, the High River Performing Arts Foundation. I'm just wondering a little bit about the history, because I remember this coming to us. Was it, and I can't remember if it was this term, like 2 or 3 years ago, and we made a recommendation, and I really meant to look up that recommendation. But Stuart, I know that your mind is a steel trap, and you'll have that information right there. Can you tell us what we did with that when they came to us and applied to be a copter?
Well, I remember when I was at the council meeting when they came in, and they weren't aware of copter, and so when Michael, I forget his last name, he came out of the meeting because he was presenting. I told him to look it up. I said, you might qualify for the exemption, because I just heard he was asking for some help, right? Because I happened to be at that council meeting. I said, I don't know if you qualify, but by all means, you could look it up, right? And you do your own research. You can apply, and we can take it from there. And they fit all of the, well, again, I can sit down with anybody who wants to talk about this, right? You're absolutely right, Councillor Masterman. It's subsidized by the community, and that's part of why we communicate this to you, if there's any questions, or hey, maybe I don't have all the information, and someone says, but wait a minute, and they tell me something, I go, oh, because sometimes you don't get the answer if you don't ask the right question, kind of thing.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, no, thank you for that, Stuart. So they've been on the list before.
Yep.
Okay. Now my next question, and before I ask this question, I really need to preface it by saying anybody in this meeting has known what a supporter of Narrow Road Home I have been. I supported them from the very first time they came to council to say we want to set up in the Noble House across from Spitzy, and I volunteered there for a while, doing a nature writing program with some of the residents, and so I have been a big supporter, but I just have a couple of questions, and one of the questions is around like when they first came to us, it was, we want to start this program to help women with addictions and other issues, and we're going to support them and we will house them and all that and give them the support they need, which is all wonderful, and I love all that. But then suddenly they're building, well, to start with, the Noble House across from Spitzy, it says here that it's administration and shelter. It's not administration and shelter to my knowledge. Administration and shelter for the residents is actually over in a house on 2nd Street, about a block northwest of the Creperie. So they built the Creperie, which is a restaurant. They sell, they're open most days. They do the same service that many other restaurants in town do. Upstairs, they sell used clothing and other items. And over at the Noble House, they have a tea house. They have a tea house on the main floor. And as of February 7th, I saw on Kim's Facebook page, they have theme rooms upstairs that they rent out to people, like the West Edmonton Mall theme rooms. So we have basically an accommodation for rent. We have a restaurant downstairs. The administration and the sheltering of the residents actually happens over at this house on 2nd that I understand is a rental, so it wouldn't be part of our taxation discussion anyway. I guess I'm just wondering, like, at what point do we think, like, they've got 2 restaurants that are in direct competition with people, with restaurants that do pay property tax, and now they're renting out accommodation in the upper level of the Noble House, in direct competition against, and I know that I know Kim, and I know she's going to say, it's all the proceeds are going to the program and it's helping the program, and I know that. I know she will, but I guess I'm just wondering. I guess you know all that, Stuart. Like you obviously talked to her, and obviously we don't do audits and things like that. But I guess I'm just wondering at what point does a nonprofit organization that is doing really good work for people in the community, do they just keep expanding and just have all these businesses and not pay taxes? And maybe I'm just thinking out loud. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm just kind of curious about this. And I just, yes, go ahead.
Again, it's, I have talked to Kim, like they used to own that, rent that other house. I forget where it is now. And they had issues with they were granted exemption, but the landlord wouldn't pass it on to them, so we revoked it, right? And I talked to her about, and she's assured me that at the Noble House, it's all used. I didn't know about the theme rooms, and I've never gone around it because it's never. I have asked, but because it's like a shelter, it's always been a bit of a touchy subject, right? And she assures me. I even actually asked her to get a letter drafted up by a lawyer. I said, I want you to assure me that all the money that's raised goes back into Narrow Road, and no one's making any unusual, like there's no director benefits or any perks. And the regulation states that it's okay that if administration are earning a living from it, as long as it's not unusual. I've never asked her, and she has provided me financial statements. I've gone through them, but not stringently. I'm not an auditor. I'm not an accounting auditor, right? I have to sort of take them at their word a bit too. But I did ask her for a letter from the lawyer because I'll be honest, I've kind of struggled with it. But I have. You can ask her. I've made her give me a lot of stuff, right? I don't just go, hey, you applied, it seems okay. Like, I don't do that, right? I've made her work for it. Like, she's given me lots of data, and I go, well, okay.
Do you have the letter, Stuart? Do you have the letter from the lawyer, Stuart?
Not with me right now.
Yeah, but that's been provided to you?
Yep. Yeah, I did the same for Sunset Drive-In too, because it was kind of what the issue with that was. They provided like $30,000 of seed money, and then like for Sunset, and then as they have their events, a little bit of that money goes back to pay that seed money off. I said, so long as it goes to only the seed money and not to anybody else, right? As a bit of a perk. So he assured me, and so I asked the same letter for Sunset and for Narrow Road.
Stuart, I really need to stress that I'm not suggesting you don't do your due diligence. I've known you a long time, even before you came to the town High River, and I know you too well to ever even think that. So, and I also need to stress that what they're doing, they are not trying to keep it secret. Like, you put the tea house on Facebook and all over the place on social media. You put the rooms upstairs, the theme rooms that are for rent by people. That's on social media. So none of it, like, it's not like anybody's trying to. It just made me wonder. That's all. And as I said before, I've been a huge supporter and still am of Narrow Road Home. I just wonder at what point, that's all. So thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
This is where there's such a fine line with this, Stuart, right? And that's where, I got big questions on Narrow Road, maybe a little more bluntly than Bruce, but, the McLeod Trail is a restaurant and accommodation. And the Creperie is a restaurant and clothing store. Kim has told me all the girls live over on the 2nd Ave rental, the big rental place on 2nd Ave. So I think there's just some questions for you to go back on that, because the way you've got it presented in here is not the way it is. And that's coming from Kim and what I know of those two places. So I just some questions that need to be answered there from Kim. And it's all about, competition. So, you've got two restaurants that are competing with our tax-paying restaurants, and accommodation, against our bed and breakfasts that we have in town that pay full tax, hotels, whatever, right? Look at the performing arts. My question was how do you differ than Carlson's? Just because you have performing arts there, well, so does Carlson's, so does Sally's. So what makes you different? Sunset Drive-In. Well, you're getting tax exempted just because you give some money back to the community. So do a lot of the businesses in this town. We all put money back in with different organizations. Do I qualify? You know, that's where there's such a fine line with this stuff as to who gets it and who doesn't. So that's where I kind of come back to, is it or should it be a council approved list of things, because it does affect our tax rates, but that's a future discussion. Councillor McMillan, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass, and thank you very much, Stuart, for your presentation. And I agree, sometimes it can be shades of gray, because I know the key component here is non-profit organizations. I have a couple comments. One is, shouldn't SNAPs be changed to be Inclusion Foothills, because that's their
true. That's right. Yeah.
And as far as my perception around the Spitzy 6 with the golf course, like I do agree that next year things should be reevaluated, because depending on the 9 holes, but considering that one of council's strategic priorities are providing activities for youth, and it's an outdoor activity, as well as considering with COVID and having the pool closed and decreasing a lot of activities, I'm rather supportive of this particular copter for this year, because I know when I've gone to the Spitzy 6, it is very affordable, but what has really pleased me is to see all the young people out and families. So I think that's part of the whole community component, Stuart, that you mentioned as well. I can speak to the High River Performing Arts Foundation, because I remember that meeting, and they had also met with me as a citizen, not as a counselor, just asking about ways that copter came up, because I just said they might be applicable. So that's just my background on them. And this is, I believe, Stuart, their 2nd year of receiving it, correct?
That's right.
Maybe
the third. Yeah.
Third. Okay, perfect. And but I understand the problem is that shades of gray, and this is a hard one, because do we as council become a bit micromanagey about this and think, well, maybe we have to approve each one? Or is it a case of thinking maybe about different parameters about, because I agree about the level of competition between the restaurants and the retail. Those are a little bit different than the all out like Inclusion Foothills or Food for Thought, for example. So I think it would be kind of interesting maybe to perhaps have a policy for the future about how, and it's not doubting your abilities, Stuart, at all. I have implicit trust in you, and that's why I worry that I don't want council to be micromanaging, but it's more to help you be able to, we shouldn't have you, the expectation shouldn't be that you have to be Columbo trying to figure out exactly what all of these people, like, of course you have to take their reporting, and maybe it is good to have letters from lawyers. I don't know. I'm just trying to safeguard you as well, Stuart. So I really appreciate the time that you've taken on this, and thank you very much.
You're welcome, Councilor McMillan. Thank you.
That's where I'm looking at it as well, Carol. It's not just that we all have different eyes on this community, right? And I don't expect Stuart to be or going out to each one and assessing each one, 14 of these every year, to make them prove that this stuff. But we've all got involvements and eyes on these things when there's changes like what's actually at Narrow Road Home, it doesn't come back as just a form that nothing's changed. That one's not sitting right with me. I don't know. I can talk to Kim about it, but that's all. There's no recommendation or anything on this agenda to approve these or anything, so it'll just be left. But this is something that I want to talk to Chris about as to what's the best way forward for these organizations and how we do this process. All good?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you very much, Mayor.
We'll move on to the next one. most grant. Leanna?
Well, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. As you are aware, in the summer of 2020, after the pandemic had started in the spring of 2020, the provincial and federal government put together a grant to help support municipalities assist with their financial impacts of COVID-19 for a period of April 1st, 2020 to March 31st of 2021. Through, and they call it a Municipal Operating Support Transfer Grant, or the MOST grant. High River's allocation is $1,427,891. I love their precise numbers. So there's 4 categories of how we can claim our expenditures or lost revenue. We have COVID-related expenditures, lost revenues, either user fees, having closed facilities, increased staffing and labor costs, and then funds that we distributed to others. Our number 1 priority was to ensure our operations were covered first before we approached targeted community groups that are an extension of our municipal operations. So we have done that. Administration has done that. And we had a number of requests of monies that they wanted us to cover through a number of meetings through senior leadership and administration. We have come up with a total of $113,944 that we would like to reallocate back to some of these community groups. And this is why we are here, to ensure that we have your blessing on distributing funds back to these groups. One of the stipulations in this grant is all of these costs have to be spent by March 31st, 2021.
Thanks, Leanna.
You're welcome.
Any questions? Ask for a motion from Councillor McMillan that Council approve the most grant allocations as recommended by administration.
I'll give you that motion.
Thank you. No further questions, comments? All in favor? Carried. Thanks, Leanna. Floodgates, Jody, Coles notes, please.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Council. Nice to be here virtually with you today. So without getting into all the details, I'll just provide an overview for this item. As you know, the floodgate was constructed and completed in 2018. At the time, the total project costs were $2.1 million. However, that included other projects in the areas such as civic works to drainage, dike construction, landscaping, and other odds and ends in the area. At that time, the floodgate was added to the town's insurance schedule at a value of $589,000. At the end of last summer, so summer 2020, Alberta Municipal Services Corporation, or AMSC, our insurance provider, provided a valuation report to ensure that the asset is properly insured for replacement value. That value came in at $3.06 million, so much higher than our insured value of $589,000. And you need to know that once AMSC has done a valuation report, that value is automatically updated on our property schedule, which then increases our premiums for that asset. Since we received that valuation report from AMSC, administration once again reviewed the floodgate project costs and determined that the value should be listed at $2.1 million, which includes the actual 2018 costs and a 30% contingency. So that was included in a spreadsheet in your package. So administration is recommending that we update the insured value to 2.1, which is significantly higher than the 589,000 we started at, but also quite a bit lower than the 3.06 million that AMSC is suggesting. Now, before council makes that decision, and it was in your package, I just want to make sure that it's very clear that if we go with an agreed value of 2.1 million, that means that if there was a loss or damage to this asset, the maximum amount that insurance will pay out is the 2.1 million, which is in contrast to the 3.06, which was determined by the AMSC valuation report writer. That value would be replacement costs regardless of it being listed at 3.06. So I'm not sure exactly what type of event would happen that would actually result in damages more than 3.06, but whatever the costs were to replace the asset with like in kind, if it was more than 3.06, insurance would cover that. So administration feels that 2.1 million is adequate to insure this asset and is asking council for their direction to support that. But I want to open it up for questions to you, Mr. Mayor, and council before making that decision.
Questions from council? Councillor McMillan?
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass, and thank you very much, Jody. I'm just trying to see in my report, what is the cost savings about the difference between the 3.06 and the 2.1?
It's going to work out to about $3,000 per year. And that's based on our current insurance rate. As you've probably noticed over your last few years on council, insurance does typically go up. So right now we're basing it on about a $3,000 difference compared to the 3.06 that will automatically be updated to if we don't go with this 2.1 million.
And so in your opinion, what would you do, I guess?
So
and I put you in the spot, but I just, you know.
Absolutely. We have put the recommendation forward to go with the agreed value of 2.1 million. And we came to that value because when we did take a closer look at what the actual costs related to design, the electronic system, and the actual mechanics of the system, the 2.1 includes that 30% contingency, which should cover anything over and above the actual cost of the asset itself. In our discussions, Riley also mentioned that if we were to have some sort of catastrophe that was community-wide, such as the 2013 high water event, that we would also have access to DRP funding or something of the like. So we feel that 2.1 million is sufficient.
Okay, thank you very much.
No further questions. I'll ask for a motion from Councillor Cooey that council approve an agreed value for the asset located on the south end of Center Street Bridge, commonly referred to as the floodgate, of 2.1 million. And the council authorized the CAO to execute the agreed value endorsement for the floodgate at 2.1 million with Alberta Municipal Services Corporation.
I will give you that motion, Mayor Snodgrass.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Risk management policy.
Thank you. I guess I'm the lucky one that gets your attention for two items today.
Perfect.
For this item, I'd like to shift your attention more from operational to a more philosophical discussion regarding enterprise risk. The town does very well identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks on an individual project, task, and day-to-day basis. However, we don't have that big picture overarching policy that provides general organizational direction on risks. So included in your council package is an enterprise risk management policy for your consideration. We also refer to it as an ERM policy to shorten that down. This ERM policy will provide that overarching philosophical approach to manage risk for our organization and our community. The ERM policy will assist with consistent identification, assessment, prioritization, and management of risks. It'll help in making informed decisions, improving strategic priority setting, and protecting our town resources, including, just to name a few, people, services, property, and many more areas. The ERM policy is intended to establish the foundation for administration to proceed with developing the town's risk management framework and then moving into the town's risk appetite statement. then we would be able to proceed with training and awareness across the organization to provide that consistent risk management practice between staff and over time. The ERM policy includes the roles and responsibilities of the Corporate Risk Advisory Group, which is the senior leadership team and the risk manager, as well as pulling in expertise from those various area leaders that are experts. And we are hoping that the above can start as soon as you guys approve the policy. But before we get there, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilor McMillan. Thanks, Jody.
Sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting. Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass, and thank you again, Jody. Just a couple questions. On page 190, do we know who is going to be appointed as the risk manager?
That would be me.
All righty. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And just a little bit of an edit on page 193 underneath enterprise risk management. There's an extra of that should be just out of there.
Okay.
And then I guess my question on page 194 under procedure is I'm just trying to grasp about the minimum steps. Is that, if you could just kind of put it more in language that I like, just to explain what that means.
And sorry, I don't actually have the whole council package up, so I just want to make sure I have the right visual in my mind. Is that the based on where it falls out on the risk rating and then what those minimum requirements will be?
It says procedure means specific written processes that are approved by the CAO, which provides guidance to employees on the minimum steps that must be followed in carrying out the intention of either an administrative directive or council policy.
Oh.
I guess just where I'm coming from is the whole minimum. What about like the applicable steps? Because to me, when I read that, the minimum steps, it kind of means like, you know, we don't have to do as seen as it's a risk management. I just think that minimum shouldn't be part of a risk management strategy. I think it should be at the higher level of.
Absolutely, I agree. We want to not only meet but exceed any expectations. So yes,
exactly.
I do like changing that minimum to applicable. We can make that change.
Thank you. And then just one more on 197. I'm not sure if, oh, where is it? It's about exploiting opportunities. And I was just thinking more along the lines of optimizing instead of like.
Ooh. Okay. As another great comment, because sometimes exploiting can be seen as taking advantage of, where optimizing is more of a positive spin.
Exactly. Seeing as it is about risk management. So thank you very much, Jody.
Thank you.
Ask for a motion from Councillor Kinghorn that council adopt the enterprise risk management policy CPRM POL 100 dated February 22nd, 2021.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. I will give you that motion.
All in favor? Carried.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jody. Shelley, I'm just going to read out the recommendation, then if council has any questions for you, because this is pretty much housekeeping that we do every year, correct?
That is correct. I'm fine with that.
Thank you very much. So I'll ask for a motion from Councillor Cooey that council approve the allocation of the 2021 FCSS community grants with funding to come from 2021 FCSS budget as follows. 10K to the Boys and Girls Club, 3K to the Foothills Regional Victim Services, 5K to the Hospice, 17.7 to the Foothills School Division, 10K to Inclusion Foothills, 2K to Junior Achievement Southern Alberta, 6K to the Rowan House, and 6,300 to Wild Rose Community Connections.
I will happily give you that motion.
Any questions from council on any of those items? Councillor Nychuk.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass. Thank you, Shelley, for the presentation that came through Mayor Snodgrass.
Welcome.
Just a question. Foothill School Division is in there. Do we ever see anything from the Catholic side, or that I don't recall during the last term that they've come up, or have they ever applied, or just a curiosity question, really? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Nychuk. We certainly have in the past. Both school boards have applied. In typical years, we're quite oversubscribed. Typically, we have requests into over 100 up to $120,000, and sometimes they're the harder group to fund when you're looking at trying to reduce funds from all these organizations. And so there's some years where the school divisions don't receive any funding, and so as a result, we haven't received requests from the Catholic School Division for the past couple of years. We do, however, sometimes see them come up in our United Way grants, because both have applied there as well. So just depends a little bit each year on the number of asks and the number of dollars that have been requested from the different groups.
Great, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Councillor Clee.
Thanks very much, and thanks, Shelley, for sticking it out with us all afternoon. Shelley, just a question, because I know last year we were unable to distribute these funds to those community groups, and so obviously you feel confident that we are able to obviously, or it wouldn't be here, right? I just wanted to acknowledge that last year we were unable to distribute these funds, so I think it's great that we are able to this year.
I am as well. These community groups help us meet our goal for quality services. They also help us meet our mandate for preventive social services. And so last year was a tough year. Those decisions and recommendations didn't come to you easily, but I think it was in the end the most fiscally responsible thing to do. We've had some changes internally, and so that allowed us to put this back into the budget this year.
No further questions. Motion's on the floor. All in favor? Carried. Thanks, Shelley.
Well, thanks, everyone.
Glad to make your Monday. Municipal election agreement. Again, Kara, this is more housekeeping stuff. We've did this at the previous election, right?
Yes, the only difference this time is we're looking to add an additional partner, which would be Christ the Redeemer.
Okay.
Because we did reach out to them as well, and they are interested in partnering as well.
Yeah, perfect. Makes it even better. Councillor McMillan.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass, and thank you, Kara. And there's just one thing I noticed on the actual bylaw itself on the fourth and whereas. It just said that you and Nicole were appointed at the December 14th, 2021 regular council meeting. So.
Yeah, I will make that change.
Okay, I'll ask for a motion from Councillor Masterman. The council authorizes the returning officer, Kara Rusk, to enter into an agreement with Foothills School Division and Christ the Redeemer Catholic Schools for the conduct of the 2021 municipal and school board trustee elections as presented at the February 22nd, 2021 council meeting.
I'll make that motion, Mayor Snodgrass.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Next one is the Daydreams Sunbeams letter. The letter is in your agenda package. Basic question, are you okay if I sign it? Any questions for Kara? We're good to go. Ask for a motion from Councillor Kinghorn that council authorizes the mayor to
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. I'll give you that motion.
You're on mute.
All in favor? Carried.
Craig, I just wanted to say quickly to thank you for clarifying the nonprofit angle. That's why I think why that came back to us. And I appreciate that. I felt better voting on it today. Thanks.
Bruce. So from there, it's just council correspondence. So letter from the MD of Ranchlands, Will Creek. That's in regards to coal on the Old Man River Water Basin allocation order. So the government is trying to reallocate water in favor of the coal mines. So big issues there. A letter of support from McCreary on our coal policy. A letter of support from the Village of Acme, and then Town of Canmore reinstating the coal policy, and a thank you letter from Stars. So my coal update is, so since what, February 8th, that the minister reinstated the coal policy and triggered the public consultation development wording. So since then, I got a meeting with Wade Clark, who is within Alberta Energy, Alberta Environment. He's the executive director of Resource. What's the name, Bruce? I could bring it up. So
I don't have it right now.
Yeah, no, I can bring it up if we need to, but he's within, he works in between Alberta Environment and Alberta Energy on all the land use planning and all. That's his big gig, right? So Wade's the guy. So I got a meeting with Wade, and I invited Kevin Van Tegum, who is, has been involved in this kind of stuff for decades now. Former, what was he, executive director of Banff National Park, Bruce. He's got credentials coming out the.
Sorry, he was the superintendent of Banff and Waterton and
right.
Prince Albert National Parks. And
perfect. So Kevin knows his stuff with the Eastern Slopes and land use policies and regional plans, et cetera. So as well as Kevin, I brought in with me David Luff, who was the former assistant deputy minister with Premier Lougheed back in the day when the original coal policy was put in place. Also, again, knows a lot about policies and land use and everything as to how to get this done. So Wade phoned me after the meeting that day, or after the announcement that Minister Savage did, and asked if I wanted to have a meeting just to discuss how the public consultation would roll out and just starting to put a plan together. So we had that meeting, and it was actually very, very good. We were all very much aligned on the fact that this can't be just some loose update to the previous coal policy. It just makes it too easy to, like this government did, but too easy to make changes without it going through public consultation and cabinet approval and everything, going through the proper process. This is way too big now in today's day and age for it to be that loose. So what we all agreed on is that it has to all be done through regional and sub-regional plans. So in our area, it would be through the South Saskatchewan region plan, and then narrowing it down to the different areas. The first one being Livingston, Porcupine Hills, land footprint policy plan, whatever it's called. A lot of this work has been done over the last 20 years. So a lot of it is sitting there. Just kind of needs to be tightened up with how Albertans feel about not just coal, but all resource development and all land uses. And David made a good point of not just fossil fuel land uses, but the renewables as well. As if you're doing solar and wind projects, they all have a land footprint that impacts stakeholders and users. So at the end of the day, I could go on for quite a while, but half an hour meeting turned into just over an hour, and very much aligned, and Wade briefed the minister on it this week, and Wade and I are talking again on Thursday, and then we're meeting again next Tuesday or Wednesday with our little group. And our little group, Wade was the one that wanted to keep it going. So I'm kind of leading that group and then bringing in who we need to with other stakeholders so that they get their feedback. Now, I don't expect that, our little group is the only thing they're doing to go outside to figure out how this plan is going to work and be developed. So, but it is the one that we definitely have an ear with the minister and with the department. So, through the last couple of months, I've got to know some others that are well versed in this stuff, and Katie Morrison from CPAWS, and there's a number of others from the Livingston Landowners Group and Pekisco Group and all these. So over the next few months, we'll be bringing different ones in, and they'll be consulting with the Indigenous communities as well. And so it's the first 6 months of 2021. So by June 2021, or the end of June, is when Wade would like to take whatever consultation package and framework and plan to put that in front of cabinet, get their approval, and then the actual public consultation would start to take place. And it's not just the coal policy, like I said, it's massive land use planning. This is not going to be a fast process. The government knows that. Texting back and forth with Minister Savage over the last number of days, she is fully committed to doing this right. They do not want to have another blow up. This is not going to be a survey monkey thing going out. And my words, if to do proper public consultation, we have to wait until COVID is kind of past us, then so be it. We can do a lot of work up until that, but she wants to do town halls and stuff with the Indigenous and the municipalities and landowner groups, etc. So it's going to be a big deal, and it could, I personally don't think it'll be done before the next election. So it will be an election issue that everybody will have to weigh in on, which is good in my mind. And because if you're not any party that isn't committed to completing this work, needs to have the gate. So this is critical to Albertans. So I'll leave it at that. Bruce, any comments?
No, I was just going to, I think I had asked you about the stop work on exploration and all that everybody, all the groups are pretty solidly against that. So I don't know, and I keep getting asked, when are we going to hear a decision on that? I don't know if you can shed any light on that, Mayor Snodgrass.
No, not right now. We made another strong case with Wade, and I'm hoping to talk to Minister Savage this week again. But just to stress that, because especially with the all the work that we know needs to be done now, with the uncertainty that there is as to whether any of these mines are going to go at the end of the day, why do any more exploration and create any more damage until we have clarity from Albertans as to how they want to manage this resource. So, pressure was put on Wade to go back to the minister and continue to stress this, but again, I know where the government is on this and trying to play a bit of a game here with, the Atrum and the Montum coal companies of the world with, halting their trading and everything else because of the uncertainty that's just popped up. So maybe that's a play that they'll wait until they know before they spend any more money. So it costs them millions to do that stuff. So, but if it doesn't happen by spring, our government needs to step up and put an end to it. So no question.
I think I just wanted to also point out very, very quickly that I've been trying to track how many municipalities have got involved since High River was the first, and I think we should be very proud that we were the first. And it's somewhere between 20 and 22 that I've been able to find out have made some kind of motion. Some of the motions were just to reinstate the coal policy, but most of them go way beyond that. in terms of stop work on exploration there and also long-term water planning and consultation there. So it's pretty impressive, and as we heard in the correspondence, there's a couple from I think one from Manitoba, one from Saskatchewan. Maybe they're both Manitoba. And I was going to mention the McCreary one, Craig, just quickly. It just came back to us saying that they were, and it wasn't clear to me that whether they actually sent it to the government. And I don't know if we can just forward it to the government, to Kenny and the ministers and Roger Reed, whatever. So I'll, that's all. Thanks.
Okay. Sounds good. Any questions? Meeting adjourned, 6 o'clock. Thanks very much. Have a good night.